Russia has won. The war is over. Ukraine is finished. There's no more need for fighting. Let's get the peace treaty going. Let it all end. The Western mainstream media is increasingly intimating that this is where their heads are at. Of course, they will never admit it rhetorically in this way. They'll never grovel. They'll never admit the full scale of the truth. But a recent Economist article shows that the foreign policy establishment in the collective West, with the United States at the lead, of course, but this includes the entire European Union establishment and all those NATO countries that go along with the war, they are beginning to think about this war having reached a conclusion, literally saying that Russia has won. This is now moving into an unprecedented level of admission and really turning on its head the narrative that we've heard for almost now 2 years, for more than a year and a half. We have heard Ukraine is going to win. NATO is going to help Ukraine win. There will be no concessions. We can't let Putin get away with it. This is a war for all wars, and NATO is all in. The United States is all in. And the only outcome that's acceptable for Ukraine is victory over Russia. And victory has many different definitions, but namely it was the expelling of Russia from all Ukrainian territory, so-called Ukrainian territory, and with some debate over Crimea. Now, The Economist is saying that Russia has won, which kind of flips on its head the entire narrative that they've been spewing for a year and a half plus. So this is The Economist from the end of November, the last day of November. Putin seems to be winning in the war in Ukraine for now. So as I said, they're never going to admit that this war is completely over. But the fact that they are willing to write in the pages of The Economist that Putin is winning, Russia, let's say, is winning the war in Ukraine is a monumental shift in the narrative. Putin's biggest asset is Europe's lack of strategic vision. So leave it to, The Economist is not a U.S. publication, but leave it to essentially U.S. controlled assets in Europe, vassals, to lay the blame on themselves. This has been Europe's degrading moment, probably most degrading moment in history since it became a colonial entity many centuries ago. This is one of the most humiliating moments for Europe in Europe's history. So this is what The Economist had to say. And I'm only going to read a bit of it because there's a lot that we need to get to with this, because this is a full-scale admission that goes across the board. So for the first time since Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022, he looks as if he could win. Russia's president has put his country on a war footing and strengthened his grip on power. He has procured military supplies abroad. And so here you're going to see a lot of propaganda. The idea that military supplies abroad is what is pushing Russia into the fast track for victory, on the path of victory, pushing them on the path of victory, is short-sighted and just a lie. It really is Russia's own industrial capacity, but they don't want to admit that. So they say it's abroad. Crucially, he is undermining the conviction in the West that Ukraine can and must emerge from the war as a thriving European democracy. The West could do a lot more to frustrate Putin. If it chose, it could deploy industrial and financial resources that dwarf Russia's. However, fatalism, complacency, and a shocking lack of strategic vision are getting in the way, especially in Europe. For its own sake, as well as Ukraine's, the West urgently needs to shake off its lethargy. So get this. Because the collective West, because the foreign policy establishment in the West cannot admit that Russia has advantages, what they've resorted to is attacking themselves. This is really historic in many ways. This is The Economist basically bad-mouthing all of Europe for not doing enough for Ukraine because they can't admit that Russia is winning on its own accord. That to me is a stunning development to see that on the pages of The Economist. The reason a Putin victory is possible is that winning is about endurance rather than capturing territory. Neither army is in a position to drive out the other from the land they currently control. Ukraine's counteroffensive has stalled. Russia is losing 900 men a day, and I'm going to show you how that's not true, to take Advika or Avdiivka, a city in the Donbass region. This is a defender's war, and it could last many years. So, one, Russia was never trying to take Ukrainian territory. How many times does Russia have to say it? How many times does its actions have to say it? Back in April of 2022, when there was this understanding a peace treaty could happen, what did Russia do? It pulled its forces from Kiev and surrounding Kiev as a gesture of goodwill. What did the United States and the UK and Kiev do? They completely threw up the peace agreement and burned it. They basically launched a flamethrower at it. So not only this, but it's just a lie. I just have to I have to correct this, because you've probably been hearing from folks like Brian Berletic and the Duran that they are just outright lying about the numbers. And before we get more into this article, I just want to show you quickly Media Zona. Now, if you don't know what Media Zona is basically a think tank started, a media institute started by Pussy Riot and the anti-Putin. Literally, they call themselves the anti-Putin opposition in Russia or abroad. And they have absolutely no interest in covering up for Russia or Putin. But even their numbers, and they've been taking casualty numbers on the Russian side since the very beginning of this conflict, and working with BBC News Russian service and doing so. And I'm going to show you the numbers here, okay, because you can actually go into the days. And I'm actually going to so I don't want to I need to change the range here. All right. So last recorded, they say 900 people a day. There was 3 confirmed military deaths from November 29th. Last recorded. 3. Does that sound like 900 per day? 3. So again, yes, and some people are pointing out that killed in action is differently, and that's why I'm showing you, of all troops engaged by Russia in this conflict, 3 confirmed military deaths, not 900 per day. We can even with a range further. Maybe you want to say November. Let's start from November 1st. 577. 1 month, not per day. So I just had to show you all that because this is from Media Zona. It is not a publication that is sympathetic to Putin or to Russia or anything of that sort. But let's get back to The Economist. So The Economist is lying through its teeth. Battlefield shapes politics. You might have heard Scott Ritter. I say it. Military conflict wars are an extension of politics. He says extension of politics by other means. Momentum affects morale. If Ukraine retreats, dissent in Kiev will grow louder. So will voices in the West saying sending Ukraine money and weapons is a waste. In 2024, at least, Russia will be in a stronger position to fight because it will have more drones and artillery shells because its army has developed successful electronic warfare tactics against some Ukrainian weapons, and because Putin will tolerate horrific casualties amongst men. What did I just show you? That's not true. Russia is actually fighting this war to not lose horrific numbers of soldiers. And not only this is an oversimplification. To believe that Russia is just winning this electronically with its air defense systems and with its ability to intercept drones, all of that is just exposing Ukraine's own weaknesses, because they don't want to admit that Russia's military industrial capacity, which was built and designed to fight this kind of war, eclipses that of Ukraine, which has already wasted all of its weapons and manpower now. So I don't even have to go through more of this because there is a lot more to show. And I want to play you now a clip from Scott Ritter, showing you why, because this really falls at the feet of the United States. The Economist is not a U.S. publication, but it might as well be at this point. Scott Ritter was on this a YouTube channel called Revolutionary Blackout Network. You should all follow them if you are not already. They had Scott Ritter on, and he gave such a good, and he'll be on this program very soon. But he gave a masterful assessment of why Russia will not lose. And the United States needs to be centered here because it is the United States that has attempted to fight this war through Ukraine and failed utterly to the point where now they have to admit that Russia is not just stalling a counteroffensive and a stalemate, but that they're winning. And in reality, this is an admission that they've won. So let's hear Scott.
Even with all this military deployment that we have, it doesn't make a difference because the Pentagon today can't win a war against a major opponent. All the money that we put into it, all the investment and such. Let's look at Ukraine right now. And we're going bankrupt supplying Ukraine with, with our money, our equipment. We've deployed 100,000 troops to Europe. We're talking about beefing up NATO forces. And we're just going flat broke. We're running out of stuff to give them. We can't produce enough artillery ammunition to sustain the operations. Meanwhile, Russia, on the other hand, this past year has mobilized 600,000 troops to fight in the special military operation.
You noticed how the Economist didn't mention any of this, what Scott Ritter is talking about. They're not mentioning any of this. So you have to rely on Scott Ritter, who knows a thing or two about war, to get this information.
They've also mobilized an additional 600,000 troops to expand their military from 900,000 to 1.5 million. Why? Because they want to invade? No, because we're expanding NATO. We're expanding NATO. We're inviting Finland and Sweden in there. That means that Russia now has to create new military districts and create new forces to man these military districts to protect themselves. We have a posture that says we're going to threaten the Arctic. So Russia has to build new forces to protect the Arctic. We're working with the Japanese and the Koreans to threaten the Russians in the Pacific. So they have to.
And China, by the way, and China. If we talk about the Pacific, this is also geared toward China.
Deploy forces there. But what I'm trying to say is that Russia's not having the same problem we're having. Russia's generated all these new troops, and they're winning a war in Ukraine right now. Even the mainstream media can't ignore that fact anymore.
As I just showed. And not only can they not ignore it, but they're saying that Russia has won, not just winning.
I don't think there's any mainstream media outlet that's saying, oh, no, Ukraine's secretly winning. Nope, they're losing. Everybody acknowledges this. Russia's has no ammunition shortage. Their defense industry has adapted in the time period to produce not only the artillery munitions, but the tanks, the armored vehicles, the artillery systems, new systems. Drone warfare is a whole new thing that's taking place right now. The Russians have reinvented drone warfare. Americans still are out there flying little plywood drones, or we're flying big, MQ-9 Reapers that'll get shot down in a real war.
Which are shot down very often. Iran has shot down MQ-9 Reapers. Of course, Russia has shot them down as well.
Russia's out there doing the real stuff, the way war's supposed to be fought. And yet here we are talking about we need more money to send another carrier battle group to the region. What's the carrier battle group going to do? Israel has a very large air force.
So he was couching this in the context of Israel. But you get the picture here. You get the picture that Russia does not have the problems that Ukraine has, that NATO has, that the United States has, because it's the United States that is overstretched and it's floundering. The United States cannot, it does not want to oversupply any one conflict, because if it does, it can't fight the big conflicts, the potential wars with Russia and China that become increasingly kinetic, increasingly confrontational. Russia and China are absolutely the ones who the United States is trying to prepare for, although it's quite clear that they're never going to be able to do this. If they can't supply Ukraine to defeat Russia on the battlefield, what makes anyone think that Russia and China somehow are going to lay down and play dead and not win some kind of military conflict with the United States? This is why the United States does not want to fight any such conflict. It's why the United States keeps such a huge nuclear arsenal. It's because they know that their empire is incredibly overstretched at the moment. And this is no more true than it is in Ukraine. This couldn't be any more true than it is in Ukraine. And so it's not just the mainstream media that's admitting that there are big problems here. Zelensky himself, who has been maybe the most stubborn of them all, here you have Zelensky accepts the counteroffensive has failed. So he began December accepting that it has failed. The Ukrainian president now believes the fact his troops are not retreating is a positive. So the fact that the troops aren't running away and not, defecting in complete and total numbers, that somehow is a positive. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky considers that fact that Kiev's troops are currently not retreating a good result in and of itself, according to an interview published by the Associated Press. He and his allies had previously criticized the country's military leadership for describing the situation as a quote-unquote stalemate. The new comments stand in stark contrast to bellicose predictions from Kiev ahead much of its hyped summer counteroffensive, which includes pledges to quickly retake Crimea. Valery Zaluzhny, Ukraine's top general, used the term in early November, triggering a barrage of criticisms from civilian officials, senior ones, and a rebuke from the president himself, who urged generals not to involve themselves in politics. Look, we are not backing down. I am satisfied, he said in the interview, powered by tens of billions of dollars in Western military aid, including heavy weaponry, yet not at forging the expected breakthrough. So he was so again admitting that this is a failure, that defeat is essentially here. Now, there's more. Okay. You also have Mr. Alexei Arestovich, the former top advisor to Zelensky. He has admitted, and I'll play you what he had to say. Glenn Deason shared it. He has admitted that Russia not only is winning now, but that all of this could have been prevented more and more. So you not only see now Russia, the Russian side, people who have been talking about the problems with this conflict from the very beginning. You not only see them talking about the peace deal in March, April 2022, but now you've had growing admissions. The top aide for Zelensky currently of the Servant of the People Party, he has admitted that the peace deal was a real thing. And now here you have Arestovich, and I'll play it in just a second. You have Arestovich saying the same thing. And so let's hear what he had to say.
Российская сторона все еще настаивала на мирных инициативах. И была возможно, и стамбульские мирные инициативы были очень.
The Russian side still insisted on peace initiatives, and the Istanbul peace initiatives were a very good intermediate document. Now, mind you, this is March 2022. April was when they came to an agreement early.
Я вам скажу, неплохие. Промежуточный документ, потому что все многие кричат статус на нейтральный в НАТО и так далее, и так далее. Мы никогда не могли.
Sorry, hold on. Because many people are shouting about the status of NATO neutrality and so on and so on.
Мы никогда не могли себе это позволить в НАТО перед.
We could never afford it in NATO, before NATO. But first of all, where is this NATO? Does it accept us or not?
НАТО, ну, во-первых, где это НАТО, принимает оно нас или нет. А во-вторых, давайте это и примет.
And secondly, let's do it this way. Now, Putin definitely puts this as a new condition.
Во-вторых, давайте так, сейчас-то Путин точно выставит это в качестве новых условий и выставляет уже фактически. Они сказали никакого НАТО.
They said that there is no NATO under no circumstances. This is a red line for us. Ukraine joining NATO was a red line.
Ни при каких условиях, это для нас красная линия. Но только теперь 200 тысяч или сколько, 300 тысяч человек были бы живы. Возможно. И пол Украины не было бы разрушено.
Perhaps, and half of Ukraine would not have been destroyed in mines. So essentially he's saying that 200 to 300,000 people would not have died in this conflict, and that half of Ukraine would not have been destroyed by the fighting.
Заминировано. Еще не было никаких шахедов, еще ничего не летело нам на голову.
There were no shaheeds yet. Nothing had flown into our heads, and so on and so forth.
И так далее, и так далее. Это большой вопрос. Я ни да, ни нет не спешу ответить.
This is a big question. I'm not in a hurry to answer yes or no. I just take it at face value for discussion.
Я просто понимаю на должную планку для обсуждения. Так вот, того не надо было подписать.
So was it necessary to sign a peace agreement in Istanbul, which they signed? They did sign it.
Мирное соглашение в Стамбуле, потому что такого пакета, в том числе там россияне были согласны на
The Russians agreed to a political discussion on Crimea. I'm not so sure about that.
политическую дискуссию по Крыму. На секундочку. Это чуть ли не акт поражения России они подписывали. Как бы, да.
So he's claiming, and I don't agree with this one bit, that Russia was signaling kind of a defeat because it was willing to talk about Crimea. I don't believe that for a second.
Мы там тоже шли на уступки, но сумма уступок, на которые шли они, но...
The amount of concessions they made was unprecedented, which I do believe. I do believe that there were concessions. The biggest one was stopping the fighting and basically keeping the realm of protection to the Donbass. So I believe that's true.
Я вам скажу, было беспрецедентно. Такого уже никогда не будет. Они будут продавливаться больше и больше.
This will never happen again. They will be crushed more and more. Yeah, Erovic is right there. So Aleksander Erovic, I mean, he's a very mixed bag. He's come into his own kind of individual personality. But as you can see, there's still some baggage there. But some truths that he's revealing that are hard truths. One, that this is never happening again. Why would Russia? There's no stalemate. That's Erovic saying. No stalemate. There's no need for Russia to negotiate with us anymore. They already did. They had agreed to stop the fighting, and they did so on terms that were favorable. And not only this, but Ukraine is just absolutely and utterly humiliated. This is what happens to client and puppet regimes that end up playing dirty ball, being basically the launching pads for US and NATO wars. There's always humiliation inevitably involved. And here you have Zelensky now admitting that Ukraine may never get to join NATO. So this was the stipulation that set it all off. This was the stipulation that was a red line for Russia, and it was absolutely non-negotiable for NATO, for the United States, and for Zelensky, who has been rabidly trying his best to position himself as the water boy for the American empire. And in doing so, he has suffered one of the biggest humiliations, I think, in the history of puppet leadership of semi-colonial, neo-colonial, and just outright junior partners of the United States. Now he's admitting that there's going to be no NATO. We don't know how it will turn out, he said. No one will be able to answer that for sure. Either we will be in NATO or we won't be in NATO. We want to, but when allies agree and conditions are met, is what Mr. Blinken, it's what Jens Stoltenberg, it's what all of them are saying. And so he gave this at a talk to students at some university. And that's the humiliation. I mean, this is what else? What else is there to say when it comes to Ukraine? The biggest, I think, takeaway here is that there is no hope for the NATO side. There is no hope for the U.S. side. They are now admitting over and over again that the war is a losing venture, that the counteroffensive, forget the counteroffensive, it's gone, it's over. They've tried the stalemate talk, but now the Economist is actually talking about losing. And it's one of those moments in history that really, I think, should hit us hard in the sense that all of this is being done in relative quiet. Now that there's a huge war again in West Asia, one that has, of course, historic implications given the Palestine question is now 70 plus years old, and one that is only going in the wrong direction when it comes to those aggressors within that conflict. Because we're in that historic moment there, we're kind of missing the historic moment here with Ukraine, with the United States and NATO, with Russia. We are witnessing a full-scale defeat happening at a level that is historically unprecedented. This is an unprecedented moment of defeat. It's not going to be tied up in a bow in the next week or month. The low-level conflict that is occurring now could last for years, but it won't change the outcome, and it won't change the conclusion. And in fact, the more time that this conflict eats up for the United States and NATO, the weaker that all parties on their side become. Zelensky, of course, is in big trouble. NATO is in disarray. NATO is not well prepared for the conflicts that it has set out. It is not prepared for the utterly disastrous and dangerous wars that it has in its, up its sleeve. And the United States itself, as the leader, as the commander in chief of NATO, is also in a politically, economically, and militarily tenuous place. So all of this is only set to get worse because Russia, its terms are the only terms that are going to determine what happens here. Russia could decide one day, which it won't, but hypothetically, Russia could decide we're just going to steamroll, and NATO would be able to do nothing about it. It would cry, it would whine, and it would threaten, and maybe it would try to enact some kind of punishment, threaten nuclear war, whatever. But Russia could if it wanted to, but it doesn't. Why? Because Russia doesn't have the same aims. It's not a colonial power. It's not an imperial power. It doesn't have the aims of the United States. That's how the United States would behave. The United States would see a conflict like this and look to take as much advantage of it, as much territory, as much influence, and as much control as it can. Russia, on the other hand, is not interested in Kiev. It's not interested in administering Ukraine. What it's interested in is protecting the people of the Donbass, protecting Russian ethnic groups and nationals, those of Russian nationality. And it is interested in preventing NATO expansion. And in these aims, it has had immense success that we will be learning from for many years to come, success that will go down in the real historical record that the mainstream Western media, the U.S. and Western collective West political class, the talking heads, the think tanks, and of course, the big corporate backers and military backers behind it, they will not cover this. So now that the Economist is admitting defeat, we can see it at all levels, but they're admitting defeat in their own way. They're not going to admit it in the way that we understand it. We understand the defeat to be total, to be squarely at the feet of the United States and of NATO. The collective West itself is going to, one, blame itself for reasons completely different because they can't acknowledge what is happening here. They can't acknowledge that Russia is now a superpower again, that Russia is not to be bullied, and that Russia can set terms regionally for itself. It does have sovereignty in a manner that absolutely undermines the United States' vision for what domination, for what hegemony, and for what imperial rule looks like into this historic period. And that's just the facts. That is where the defeat squarely lies. That is where this history-shaking and shifting moment truly takes center stage. And we are going to have to continue to follow this development because it's only going to get worse from here for NATO, for the United States, for Zelensky, for Ukraine. And I will be here covering it every step of the way. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.